Hey, welcome back. Thanks for showing up. I get a chance to talk to Evan Martin today. Evan has been playing in bands with different instruments in Asheville for the past 20 years. He is one of those folks that I was able to go see, learn from, just from observation, and then got a chance to talk to during a set break at Little Jumbo when he was playing with the Core, which is just full of monster players. What they do, it's one of those bands that's really exciting to kind of discover when you're here in Asheville and learn that several of them just tour worldwide, and they just call Asheville home and they get together and they create this incredible music. And Evan is the drummer that they choose to play with them. And I think it became pretty clear to me, you can just tell the way he listens to everyone and contributes musically in his playing. And so it's just really exciting to watch and experience. But before I go on, I want to remind you to go ahead and subscribe, like, comment, do all the things on whatever platform you're using. That really helps me out a lot, and the feedback is welcome. But otherwise, so back to Evan. He plays with the Core at Little Jumbo regularly. He's also in the band Amanda Platt and the Honeycutters, and that is an incredible band. Definitely need to check that out. And I think he's played several different instruments with that band since he started, or since he's been playing with them. But what you'll find, at least what I found with Evan, is that the well runs deep. He is very considerate about the way that he thinks about music. He explores the philosophies, and he doesn't hold on too tight to any of these ideas necessarily, but he's constantly exploring. Super thoughtful, really interesting. And so, stick around for that, and I'll see you next time.
I'm a guitar player first. I started playing guitar when I was 12. I had was given a guitar and started learning like Nirvana stuff and Jimi Hendrix, a lot of riff music.
Yeah.
But as a real little kid, I've always been like a hand tapper and kind of like a rhythm person. What was his name? I think Mickey was his name, and the Monkees. He was the drummer.
Uh-huh.
He's always my favorite. So I always was like very captivated by the drums, and always very much listening to the drums, and like beatboxing to myself in the shower, I remember. But when I was 19, the band that I was playing in the drummer left his drums at my house, and that kind of became the jam spot. And so then I had drums at my disposal.
Okay.
And that's kind of when I became addicted to playing for hours on end and trying to, learn beats and mimic the stuff that I was hearing on records.
And were you still maintaining your practice with the guitar during that time too?
Yeah. I was actually going to school for jazz studies.
Wait, you at what age?
Oh, I was at 19.
19, okay.
Yeah, so I was at CSU at Cleveland State University, and I was studying guitar. And around that time, I just kind of I was still playing a lot of guitar, but then also was spending a lot of time trying to play the beats that I heard. Like Menesky Martin Wood was a huge influence. Brian Blade, played along to those records that he was on.
I didn't really learn about Brian Blade until like recently, probably in the past year or two. But you were listening while you were in music school at that point.
Yeah. I don't remember the first time I heard Brian Blade, but yeah, he was just one of the guys that I would like just play along to and try to copy what I heard.
And Billy Martin too.
Billy Martin was kind of like. Yeah. So my guitar teacher, it's become like a ubiquitous record at this point. The John Scofield, A Go-Go record.
Yeah.
It's almost, and it's not really like Kind of Blue, but there's some similarities. Like I feel like for the later generation of younger jazz fans like myself, it really brought in a lot of new listeners, I think, probably to, jazz music, to maybe get into John Scofield than who he had worked with. But anyway, that record was given to me by a guitar teacher, and I was just immediately like in love with the organ trio sound, like just that band. I'd never heard of Medeski Martin Wood before that. But so yeah, I started listening to Billy Martin a lot and one thing that I always was into about his playing and that really resonated with me was just the bounce that he always brings to the groove.
Yeah.
And that was something that I had been craving for a long time. Probably since I was around 9 or 10 when I first started listening to rap music and hip hop and like the loops that, and the beats that were being made and, what people were rapping over, because there was a element of swing in that music that wasn't really present in anything from the 70s or 80s. It was kind of like something that was being used from the 60s that I really craved. But anyway, I felt like Billy kind of kept that bounce alive and inspired the band to swing and move like that. I think that's what really drew me to his playing.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time practicing with the ands on the hi-hat while playing funk grooves and everything.
Nice.
But yeah.
Yeah. And they were touring back in those days too, right? Did you ever see them?
I didn't see him then. No, I saw him later. I did see Billy Martin at a Bonnaroo one time that I was at, and I just like made a huge fool of myself. I just stood there while he was in a conversation with like two other people, like a big nerd, and they like looked over at me and acknowledged that there was this like fuzzy looking 19-year-old like hanging around, and they finished what they had to talk about, and then they like politely looked over to me and said, "Okay, now it's your turn. What do you want?" And so I was just like mumbling something about him being my favorite, and he was so nice to me. And then for some reason I was on this kick of giving like the Nixon fingers, like the two peace signs up, and just be like, thank you, you're my favorite musician. And as I'm saying that, backing away, I catch my foot on a big tree root and just like face plant onto the ground.
Yeah.
Which I think is great.
Yeah, it's like something that like you, like when you meet your heroes, it takes you out of your normal rhythm for sure. You get nervous and you just like, trip over the trees.
I think, the fact that I did fall down made it a more poignant moment for me, and hopefully he'll remember that too. So.
Nice.
But yeah, man, that was like the beginning of trying to play drums. And then I really wasn't in any bands or anything. I moved down here as a guitar player, and my first gig was like hosting a blues jam.
When did you move to Asheville? How old were you?
I was 21.
Okay.
December 29th, 2003. So it'll be 20 years.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have a party.
Nice.
Yeah.
I moved here in the spring. I think it was April of 2004. So I was like
Awesome.
just 4 months behind you.
Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Because this town has changed so much, and it's really...
Here's what I found.
Sorry about that.
It's changed a lot. It's cool to have moving to Asheville, I still think is one of the best decisions I ever made in my life.
Nice.
I mean, it's definitely paid off. I'm really glad.
And what was the draw?
Well, I'd been visiting the area for a long time. My dad's side of the family, they're all from Jersey, but they wound up moving down in the 70s to the Waynesville area. Okay. And so as a kid, we'd go and visit them. And so I always knew about the mountains, but as I became more interested in music and was wanting to be a musician and a guitar player, I was really into finger picking and acoustic music. And Cleveland, I know it had a scene like that, but it didn't seem to me, or at least it wasn't in my sphere, like the roots scene wasn't as strong up there. And when I came down here, I realized the acoustic music roots scene was very strong and thriving. And there was a lot of cool people, a lot of like-minded people. And the
music scene was really starting to get big. I think Orange Peel had already been established, and
it was pretty new at that time, I think. So yeah, it was a good move, and I was like, should I go to Nashville to pursue music? And then my thinking at the time, and I'm glad that I had the wherewithal to think this, was that I just didn't want to climb over or attempt to climb over a pile of talent to get me into a musical situation that was fulfilling,
right?
Regardless of the career implications. I just felt like this would be a smaller town, and there was going to be a higher percentage of people who were going to be thinking like me and feeling the same things that I was feeling, and it would be easier to meet those people and get into those musical situations.
Yeah. So like still some consideration about the community you wanted to find in music, and also there like some sense of the competition and saturation, and versus like kind of a market like Asheville, just a bit smaller, but still supportive musicians.
Yeah. And there was probably more complicated 21-year-old thoughts going on at that time too that led me to that decision, but it just felt right. You know, it's definitely like too much of a hippie to really feel like Nashville was going to be the place where I was going to do well. So.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. And Asheville is definitely welcoming of that.
Yeah. It was so easy to like kind of cruise in and start meeting people and playing. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have had it any other way. I get to play with so many, I'm in a situation where I'm in bands with like some of my favorite people on the planet that I've ever met.
Nice.
And playing music that's inspiring and that I just gravitate towards and that I seem to fit into really well.
And that happened early on, like after moving to Asheville, or how long did it take you to kind of find that?
It's been happening the whole time, and it happened pretty early on too. So in Cleveland, I would go to the Blues Jam to just get some hang out and play on stage and be in a situation where it's like you're playing, I guess, professionally. Like, all right, here's the beat, 1, 2, 3. Like, there are responsibilities when the song starts. Like, now you take a solo, and this isn't just jamming at your house. This is I guess, cutting your teeth or whatever. So that's where I would go to do that. And the scene was interesting too. It was a very diverse and super cool neighborhood bar that the Blues Jam was at up there, and people watching was really great. So anyway, when I came down here, I got the Mountain Express, and I was like, where's the Blues Jam? That's like what I like to go to, and that's where I want to go to find gigs. And so that's where I went. And
the Westville Pub.
Westville Pub, yeah. Yeah, and so I met a lady who, Peggy Retus, who's still playing around. In fact, I just played with her for the first time in probably 16 years.
Oh, wow.
A couple Fridays ago. It was great. So I joined her band on guitar. But yeah, as a blues jam, I was running the Blues Jam. You know, you sing a few, play a few, and then I would jump around on different instruments. And my friend, who was behind the bar at the time, she saw that I could play drums. She had a band, hired me to play drums. And then I think through that band, people kind of understood me as a drummer. And I kind of...
When was that?
2004.
Okay, so it was like pretty soon after you moved here.
Yeah.
And did you come here with a drum set?
I did, but then I got a cooler one pretty shortly after. Actually, the guy who's the drummer at the Blues Jam, he wanted to part with his. It was a sort of a mismatch, but it's got all the same wrap, but it's like a 60s Ludwig 22-inch kick, and then a Rogers Holiday rack and floor tom.
Gotcha.
And then this cool Japanese 60s snare drum, which I'm not even sure what brand it is, but it's all got the same wrap on it, and I still play those.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. One of the so I knew you before this. I've seen you play several times now with the Core at Little Jumbo, and one of the things that initially struck me, like I started in my own path, like kind of refinding and reestablishing myself as a musician and as a drummer. I decided like I would go to like Little Jumbo or Five Walnut or these local places and just like study, like listen actively and watch everyone playing, obviously, especially the drummer. And one of the goals at that point was to really start to build my independence and to comp like a jazz musician or like a jazz drummer, right? And so like you caught my ear and eye because of the way I saw you looking at everyone. And also like your limb independence was really good, and the feel was all there, but you could also, so you could swing, but you could also lay down a really grooving backbeat as well to whatever y'all were doing. And so like just the style and the choices I thought were just, were excellent. And so then,
I guess this is obviously for the listeners, just like, and then, we met, and then pretty soon, like, you were gracious enough to come over for, just some jam sessions to help me while you played other things because you're a multi-instrumentalist, right? One of the things that you told me in those conversations that I've been like really wanting to dive into now for a while is that you said you were originally a guitarist, as you've been talking about, then drummer, but you said that drumming has changed the way you think. So that's kind of what I'm curious about now.
Yeah.
Like,
well, you get a perspective. I think I know this from being a guitar player and remembering and still feeling this way when I get to play guitar, is like drums are very often taken for granted by the other. I take them for granted as just something that's going to be there. And when they go away, it's just like, I get indignant, like as if somebody shut my power off or something, like something that I'm entitled to. It's like this thing that has to be there, should be there, and is like, that I'm I'm owed or something, and
right.
then I need desperately to get my ideas on the table as like a melodic player, if I'm going to be playing with like in a band with rhythm and drums and stuff. But anyway, just like, yeah, it did change my perspective because changed my thinking because you have this perspective on drums that if you can get past the limb independent stuff, then you can just start opening up your ears and listening to the way the music is sounding overall. And you can kind of just sit on top of it and make these like micro adjustments to what you're doing to get that pocket sounding big and get the music sounding really good. Like you've got all this control on the drums in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a big instrument. It's such a weird instrument because sometimes, and lately this is going to kind of sound sad, but I almost don't even feel like I'm playing music when I'm playing drums now.
Okay.
I feel like I'm helping to facilitate music.
Right.
I'm really just framing the music that I want to hear. And I'm trying to get away from that. I'm trying to like get my sound back together. Maybe it's just a personality thing. Like I'm sort of like this giver type, and I forget about myself a lot of times in life. And I do think that no matter who you are, your personality comes through on your instrument. It's an extension of who you are, I think. And I think to a large degree that manifests itself when I play the drums and when I play music with people. And it works in some situations and it hasn't worked in other situations, and that's all dependent on what that band leader or band or combination of people need from a drummer, just like what one person might need from another person in a relationship. You know, not everybody is a giver, not everybody is just a natural leader, or maybe you are like a natural, like only see your perspective and you just go for it all the way and let the chips fall where they were, and then other people come around, or vice versa. You know, there's just all different types of people that react to the world in a certain way. And I guess that you can understand yourself better. I understand myself better through years of playing drums and putting myself in many different musical situations and realizing what worked in that situation and what didn't. And I can use the drums as almost like a metaphor for how I conduct myself in life. So that may have been quite off the subject of the topic of what you asked, really.
It's beautiful. No, that is thought provoking. I'm like got 1,000 thoughts in my head right now just based on that concept. Like, cause that in many ways, that's kind of how I've thought about it or started thinking about it. You know, I think early on, you know, I started playing when I was like around the same, like 14, right? And so it was very much like this whole idea was like given to me by my drum teachers or mentors or whoever I found, was like, you're the band leader, you're the unspoken band leader, right? And it's like this whole idea that you're the heartbeat, so to speak, or the rhythm section's the backbone. all these kinds of things that like lift you up when you're learning the instrument, and maybe build some confidence. And also, I don't know that that's like the full story either, right? Like, and what I found like pretty soon after that, and like playing in school bands, and then also into college, was that depending on who you're playing with, there's a lot of demands that can come out from people, right? Like, so if it's like a lead instrument or like lead melody instrument and someone's like writing their song, it's very much that supportive role, right? Like you feel like a drummer for hire, and it's like, this is what I want out of the drums and this is what I'm trying to do, so then it feels very much like subordinated in that way. But it's this mix because you still have all that power that you're talking about, like, because when you go out on stage, like you can make or break that performance, or like you always hear the band's only as good as the drummer, know? So then it's just like this weight of that. And then to different philosophies, like there's a lot, it seems to me like there's a lot of jazz band leaders now that are drummers. At least that's what I'm biased. That's what's coming through on my filter through the algorithm or whatever, but that's what I've been following a lot of. And so, and some of them talk about how like their favorite mix is when the drums are just behind or next to the lead vocals or trumpet or whatever that lead is, right? Like kind of interplaying with those. And the whole idea too is that like, kind of like you're talking about, like you're the supportive role. Like one of the things is like, you're the number one music fan and you have the best seat in the house. Right. And so it is again, like this supportive role.
Yeah, it's tough. I think it's a constant, it's the constant goal is to strike that balance of being supportive, but not overly supportive, I guess. You have to be present and you have to be convicted in your playing, but not to the point where you're not listening to the vocalist or leader of the band or whatever is carrying the song at that point, or the piece of music that you're playing. Like there is there's like a pinnacle of the music. Like there's like a point that like the listener is going to be locking into. They can delve into whatever, but casually, if something comes on, there's going to be something that shoots out at you. And usually it's the vocals or like the melody. And so, what you're doing on drums, like you're like activating, you're like helping largely define when that note starts and stops. You're framing that emotion behind that melody. And so it's a large responsibility to know, like, it's not even just about how fast, but just like where the beat is coming down at, and like this space that you're creating for that melody. And again, I get so wrapped up into it. I get like sometimes I get too open and big. I'm like, this is the amount of space that I think that you should be able to occupy. But then it's like, it feels too slow or it's too draggy or something like that. So you need to pick it up. And then that window closes, and then I'm not really hearing what that leader is hearing. And so that's when stuff can kind of break down, or when there's like not really a synthesis of, between what I'm doing and what the leader's doing. And that happens sometimes, but sometimes there's no talking, there's no discussion. It just happens naturally, and then it feels great. But again, I forgot what you asked me. So
No. I mean, it's just like how your brain changed, when you started playing drums, and like, it's very much, I think what you've been talking about, is the kind of the framework that you provide. Yeah. And like, and you were a guitarist first. And so like you the way you talk about it is not just a supporting role, but like a big part of the architecture for like where the feel is. And it seems like it really does have an effect on the way, obviously it has an effect on the way everyone plays, but like sometimes I think about like composer, right? Of a riff or whatever, like they have an idea, like guitarists might sit there and like just start noodling and figuring something out. and sometimes I don't know, like I don't know enough about that aspect, so maybe you can shed some light on like that process of writing a song or to completion before you might even like bring in a drummer or have that concept of where the drums are.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe like, yeah, I just kind of want to hear like your process for now, like if you're still composing or thinking about music, because if it wasn't clear, like you play guitar, that's obvious, you said that, drums, but also piano.
Yeah, I can play some keys too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and trying to get better at that. Well, I mean, so another thing too is like every person in the band has got their own like rhythm too. I don't know. I kind of feel like sometimes I feel like I've got like triggers. Like the drums are basically triggers for everybody else in the band.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I try to connect with the bass player, you know, obviously like your kick foot. And then whatever's on the opposite end, you're kind of like building that relationship with the bass player. And say we're playing like, say I'm in a jazz band or something, and then there's that happening. But then there's somebody comping, like a piano player or a guitarist. And then so then I'm talking to them with the snare hand. I'm also talking to the soloist or the melodic person with that rhythm hand too, or the snare hand. But it's just kind of like I kind of like use these things to sort of communicate in the moment with what everybody is doing to try to keep everything balanced.
You have the full range.
You're like
from
kind of
low end
working
to
in
high
every
end.
department in a way. It's like you're playing drums, but you're kind of playing everything at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is maybe like one of the appeals for me. Like I get to like stretch out my musical impulses across my entire body. Like it goes to every limb and finger, and that's satisfying. The visceral satisfaction I get
Totally
from playing the drums.
Yeah. So like you're like, you have a hand in every department. Like you're kind of, you have this executive role. And also you're the supporter. So like what I was thinking about this morning before you came over, I was like, man, playing drums is kind of like middle management, you know?
Yeah, maybe it is. Yeah. Wow. I haven't thought about that. Oof. Maybe that's why I'm so stressed out.
Right. Now, right. Start thinking about like TPS reports and stuff. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it is like, it's that kind of power. And it's just, I mean, one of the things that just harkened back to me was like, thinking about middle management, you know, I worked as a physician assistant, right? So like you're not the doctor, but you're also not a medical assistant, so to speak, like someone who's just kind of doing what's been told and like covering all that. MAs are amazing, and I'm not taking away anything from their own executive function in that, but just as far as thinking about it like like business structure when it comes to this kind of stuff, it's like I think that the middle manager oftentimes is the person that the crew goes to with problems and then has to convey that to, you know, upper management. Yeah. And then upper management also tells middle management what to do and then conveys that to everyone else. Like they're the link, that communicator of like what's going on with the big ideas in the boardroom versus on the ground, like at the desk. Right. So it's kind of, yeah, like you catch it and give it on all ends.
Yeah. That's a great one. You can, this, one of the ones that popped into my head the other day was like, we're like drummers are on like the special teams on like a football team or something like that. You know, like I've always heard that the rest of the team doesn't really talk to the kicker a whole lot.
Right.
But the kicker can win or lose a game.
Right.
It's almost like, I don't know what you are doing. I don't know what you need to do to get the ball through the goalpost, but you better do it.
Right.
Because we need that. And it's kind of like, you know, somebody like, let me play your drums real quick. And then they like bust out their hip hop groove. And they're like, all right, that was fun. It's like, yeah, that was like 25 seconds of a groove. You know, like it's sort of like this mysterious thing. Like how could anybody possibly just keep making this thing out of thin air, like this energy, basically by combining a bunch of rhythms together at once and then just keep doing it. It's coming from like a string or a melodic minded individual. I feel like you'd have to assume that the person doing that is pretty crazy, are compulsive, and I have a hard time disagreeing with that. Like,
Yeah.
there's something that is compelling me to hit these surfaces over and over and over again in a very regular pattern. And yeah, I can remember being like 5 and zoning out on a rainy, like in the car, like on a rainy day, watching the windshield wipers going back and putting like polyrhythms in my head with the sound of the, so that's like something, it's an impulse that's always been there for me.
Yeah.
And it's not there for a lot of people, you know, it's not to have like the energy to want to do that for an entire song,
Right.
let alone like potentially 30 songs if it's a long gig, you know?
Yeah. That's really interesting. Like, cause a lot of times, so like, you know, in every like psychology 101 book, there's like a center spread, you know, it's got like usually, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people, we'll just say, on this center spread, like several panels long, and everyone's smiling and one person's frowning, 1 out of 1,000. And people find that person like that, like really quickly within seconds, because we all look for patterns and we look for disruption in patterns that can kind of lead to our anxieties, right? Like if there's something about, you know, anything that's going on and it's not expected, that brings up some fear. But first it starts with curiosity, right? Like you start with like, what is that? Is this a threat? This is not fitting my pattern, right? So kind of, this might be a reach here. The windshield wipers, right? There's a rhythm to that. Like, and I feel like we all have our rhythms, like as we kind of go through the day. But like, so I feel like in some ways we're all just subjected to this rhythm of life, of energy that's going on around us, you know? And so I find that my thought right now, this is kind of in real time, what I'm exploring right now is this idea that a drummer maybe, who is seeing like watching and listening to the windshield wipers in their rhythm go back and forth, and then start either looking for other polyrhythms like the blinker in front of them, from the car in front of them, or you start tapping on the steering wheel or whatever. It's like this incredible sense of presence in the moment, you know, like in a curiosity that's happening. And initially, like when you say not everyone has that, initially, like I was thinking, don't we all have some of that? But I think you're right. I don't think that we do.
I think, to the extent of maybe like, cause I mean, like, little kids, we music hits, it's rare to find somebody who music has a very little impact on or effect on. So I think everybody reacts to it or feels it. I guess what I was saying is there's not that many people who feel compelled to do it to the degree that drummers do it, like sit down and sustain it. You know, I think the sustaining of the compulsion to bang out a rhythm is like maybe like another level to that. Yeah. But I don't want to, I do think that far and away, like human beings, we do react to rhythm naturally. And I do think, for better or worse, everybody's got it. You know, not for better, but I mean, like everybody pretty much has it. Yeah. I actually have an uncle. I've got 2 uncles who I work with now, doing daytime work, and they are interesting guys, and they're real smart, and they're numbers guys. And the older of the 2, I sat in his truck. We went down to South Carolina once, and he didn't put his seatbelt on. He's like old school. He won't wear a seatbelt, and he's got a newer truck, and so there's this alarm going off, you know, every 3 minutes or so to remind him to put his seatbelt on. And he's not paying attention to it. He doesn't care. He doesn't hear it. I'm going insane. And then the other uncle is like cool, like knows that music is cool. His favorite song is "Don't Worry, Be Happy."
Okay. Bobby McFerrin's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that might be the only music he listens to.
Right.
It might be that
also
one
happened a long time ago. Right.
So for them, maybe this idea, like there are people out there who it doesn't like the rhythm. It's not that compelling, you know, maybe unless they get a few drinks in them. But I guess my point was like to sit down and want to play drums for a long time. That's like a separate category of.
I follow you. And even like, I think like, as I'm starting to understand too, like understand your point, like if we all do have the capacity, it doesn't pull everyone's attention. Right.
Yeah.
Like they're thinking about other things. Whereas
Yeah.
like when given the opportunity, if we, as drummers, if we hear it, like we're going with it. We're like trying to, what was that one thing that you said that always struck me? It's like you were on the hunt for it. Right. Do you remember that? Like
I said I was on the hunt. You're
well,
on the hunt.
you had made this amazing kind of, it was revelatory for me, but one of the times that you came over to jam and you were like, we were just talking about philosophy and you were like, yeah, you know, when you're bobbing your head, it's not because you found the rhythm, but it's because you're searching for the rhythm.
Oh, right. Yeah. I was like, still kind of like on this kick of nobody really plays the real beat. Like the real beat is
we were talking about pocket, I guess.
Yeah.
Or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Or just rhythm in general. It's like is what it's what makes it compelling. It's what like drags you around. It's the pull towards the beat that you can never if you catch it, your head stops moving. So it's like, oh, there it was forward. No, I need to go back and get it. Oh, forward, back. And then like your head is bobbing. And I was like, kind of, I don't know. I've every once in a while think about what I said when I said that. And I'm like, do I really believe that? I mean, does that just sound nice to me because it alleviates some degree of liability when I'm doing anything?
It's like a justification of not like finding it every time.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, like the biggest pockets that I can feel like either listening to or the ones that I've been involved with, there's a ton of air. There's a ton of space in there. There's like space for everybody. So, I mean, that kind of tells me that the more space you can create, like I guess the bigger the inflatable pocket is, and is the real beat the absence of the sound? Like, is it the rests in between that nobody's actually playing that really makes stuff grooving? And I guess like the degree of faith that the musicians exercise while playing together is to how consistent and in a lot of senses, how much space can go by before everybody comes back together in a predictable and graceful manner. And that's what creates really killer sounding grooves, you know, and it could be in any type of feel really. Because, you know, the punk feel is an energetic certain thing. Right. And it's all like, it sounds like it's all like right there down the middle of the pike. And I guess maybe it kind of is, but there's something there that like, there's a space because it's so articulate. When it goes away, there's a space, and there's like a combustion that happens, you know, like we were just talking earlier, I really like cars, and there's a compression stroke. Oh no, I'm going to reveal my ignorance about something I just said I'm really into, but basically like there's a compression stroke and an ignition stroke, but there's like when the piston goes up, it explodes and then it sucks back down, and it's like pulling more air and fuel mixture into the cylinder chamber, and then that's what keeps it moving back and forth on its own, basically. Right. So maybe that same thing happens when a bunch of people play music together, or even like it can even happen like with a cappella singing, you know? I mean, so my wife is a great songwriter, and she's been hosting these songwriter nights. Amanda, yeah. And and playing with her has been amazing, you know, and a learning experience too, just from a rhythmic perspective, because she's got her own thing rhythmically. But she invites these songwriters to come over. You know, it's just kind of like people can come over and we sit in a circle. Everybody will share a tune that they wrote, and sometimes there's conversation about it, sometimes not. And it's a really special little place for songwriters to kind of hone their craft and bounce off what they're doing, just put it in the air, and they can hear it within the context, knowing that the people who are listening to it are also songwriters. And this isn't just, they're not just performing into a mic for a bunch of people that may or may not care or may not get into it. It's like this is its own special venue that I think is beneficial for the songwriter. But what I'm going to say is some of the biggest grooves and pockets I get to experience are on those nights when I'm hearing someone just with their guitar and how they can suspend time and space with the strength of their voice, or even like and then their guitar, which is oftentimes pretty like basic, just like strumming chords. A lot of times it's intricate finger picking stuff, but a lot of times it's not, just like chords, next chord, melody, and singing. And the amount of space that is in those performances is really it's mind-blowing to me. I just love being that close to it. And they're creating a space between their breath and their guitar. And I'm almost thinking they could probably just do that with their voice. And it's almost like they're creating space with the lyrics and when they take a breath. And I feel like there's a rhythm in that, maybe not a regular pulse or anything that we would think of on drums, but there's something happening with like an energy coming in and just like a breath, like you're just waiting for that next line. And then you get it, the tension release sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that whole nobody playing the beat thing, I think is there. I think maybe it's just like leaving space for the divine.
Yeah.
To come in and participate in the magic that we're all kind of trying to hover around.
Right. Like you become kind of the conduit for whatever that force is that's coming through and like, entering like that energy.
Yeah. But
well, I still the metaphor has been, has definitely been inspiring for me to kind of think about in that way of like, maybe it does provide some of that justification or some excuses if you don't get it right. But also, man, and especially the way that, like, at least in the venues that I've seen you, like you're playing with the core, right? Which is a group of like seasoned professionals and are really good at what they do. But how many people are in that band?
There's 5 of us.
5.
Yeah. So there's tenor, saxophone, trumpet, piano, upright bass, and drums.
Yeah. So, and it feels big, right? Like it's 5-piece, but at least like definitely you got Bill on keys, who covers a wide range, and then between the trumpet and the sax player too, like they're kind of covering some different areas. And is it Zach that's on bass? Zach Page, and so that's a lot of folks with a lot of ideas and a lot of experience. And so at any point in time, I can imagine there is a hunt for that rhythm or like the pocket maybe on where you're all like meeting too, right?
Yeah, it changes within a song for me because like Bill, Jacob, Justin, and oftentimes Zach, but those 3 guys mainly are either playing the melody or soloing, and then Bill Comps obviously, but each one of those guys has I can feel it. They've got a different way of coming down on the beat. There's like a different trajectory. It's not even like something that we can work on. We can all work on that, but it's like, we're all just like asteroids, man. We're coming in from distant light years away. And like, there's a trajectory from which we just are coming from when we land on the beat. And that doesn't matter if you're a drummer or whatever. It's like, it's the groove that so I've been playing with them for a long time. And so now I know what each one of those guys wants and needs dynamically, but also rhythmically. And to keep a song going where there's 3 soloists, these songs are like 12 minutes long usually.
And they all come with like a breadth of vocabulary too, right? Like it could go a lot of places, I would imagine.
Yeah. And that's a part kind of built into a lot of those songs. I mean, it's like the improvisational nature of it is just being on your toes and being open to communicating and listening to what somebody else is playing and then respond to it, and maybe coming in with a set of goals and ideas about what you're going to play, but you gotta, just get ready to react basically.
Yeah.
But so like, yeah, just being flexible enough to know like each one of these players is going to have a different, a bunch of different moves that they're going to do, and they're going to hit the beat a certain way. And I just need to be aware of that, I guess. And it helps that we've been playing so long. So.
And then some of the other bands that you play with, like what do those look like?
So yeah, this band, The Core, is like, these guys are amazing jazz players. and so I get to do that. But I also like to play a lot of country music. Amanda's band is called the Honeycutters, and they've been described as Americana or country, and that requires a totally separate style of drumming, which I've been learning over the course of my time playing with them.
And how long have you been playing with them?
Oh, 6 years, maybe 7 years. First year and a half or so I was playing keys. But there's an adjective that I like to use called starchy. You got to have like a straight back. It's kind of like the attitude of being a country person is present in the spirit of that music, which obviously follows and makes sense. But maybe if you reverse engineer it, it's not so common to think about the way that you actually have to take on that attitude if you're going to participate in that music. Like, it's almost like I have to, and I am kind of country. I grew up in a rural situation, and I like being outside and like messing around with hay and tractors and stuff. But like, got to get in that spirit of being like, you're embodying a rhythm, and the rhythm is the embodiment of a people who live a certain way. And not like Amanda's like a country singer, but like that style and that perspective is baked into how she writes and that spirit. And so, and also the bass player who I play with in that band, he is killer flat picker, acoustic guitar player. He was learning like Scott Joplin stuff on piano when he was like 8. So he's got a nice like breadth of influences. But on bass, he started out in bluegrass bands where he was the beginning and ending. I mean, I guess, with mandolin, they chop and they're kind of like the snare drum, but the bass, it's a huge part. They're like the rhythm section. Everybody's kind of looking at him to like make sure. And he's got this very specific type of like on off note. I mean, he's so crisp and convicted in his bass playing and in his country bass playing that like he is very loudly and clearly defining what the drums need to be like, because there's only so much space that, I mean, he's just giving me very clear information on where the drums are going to make sense. And it's just taken me a long time to figure out my position against a bass sound like that. That is, I mean, he couldn't be more different than a guy like Zach. They just come down on the beat differently. And when you listen back on recordings to both bass players, they both sound fantastic.
Right.
You would never question what's happening with the bass. They're carrying the song, but they're a couple different asteroids for sure.
Yeah.
And
I love listening to bluegrass and Americana and all that. I can also not imagine playing in that, because, and I love it because it like typically very tight bands, and very much there's a rhythm that is specific, like you're saying, to like that type of music. I always view it like a train, moving down the line, and it's, and maybe, I don't know why I enjoy it, but to play with it, it sounds like it'd be stressful and somewhat monotonous.
Yeah, well,
and maybe that's just more my own temperament,
Yeah, I mean, I think anything can be monotonous if you're not connected with it, if you're just going through the motions. And I've come to a point where I've listened to a lot of that music growing up, so I've always been drawn to Amanda's music. Like John Prine could essentially be an uncle of mine. I've never met him or anything, but his voice, like it was just as familiar to my ears as a family member.
Yeah.
And so that was him, and then Nancy Griffith, and like the more songwritery country. I don't even know what you'd call them, like the beginnings of Americana, but that kind of sound has always been in me. So that's why I was always drawn to Amanda's music. So I do have a relationship with that kind of groove, or a groove that works in that kind of music, like a specific voice of groove in that. Because I mean, that's different than like George Strait or something.
Sure. It's kind of like this roots music that, I don't know. I had a conversation the other day with another drummer, who was playing in a lot of different kinds of bands and kind of came up in gospel. And when he made a transition and started playing with like kind of bluegrass and some like kind of newgrass stuff too, he started realizing this was jazzier jazz, and he started realizing like, oh, this is like shout music.
Yeah.
That we play in the church, you know? And it's like you totally see, and I don't know if you've seen any of the documentaries from Ken Burns, whether, like for country music specifically, but like they talk about that, how intertwined.
Oh yeah.
And what they would call then like rhythm and blues or race music in country music, and like how much that's all tied together, and like it's all spiritually based, you know?
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's American music for sure. And Americans, are the ones who created this kind of thing, you know, and the Americans are diverse. I couldn't agree more with that. It is like shout music, you know, it's just got that back and that 1-2 like energy. But that being said, you know, Amanda writes a lot of like down mid-tempo stuff, which is deceivingly difficult to play. You know, there's a lot of space there that you're not playing, so you have to be very patient, and having a relationship with a good bass player in a band is crucial to like keeping that energy afloat at like 91 beats per minute or even 85. You know, when it's not totally a ballad, there still has to be movement going on. It's a tricky, it presents its own challenges for sure, that I get a lot of satisfaction from when I get to hear it come together live.
And so like kind of one of the other things that, you know, I like to talk about for this show, for this podcast, is kind of the blocks that sometimes we come to, and you've kind of listed some several times, like, and especially like with this band, like what your role is exactly. And like, but you're finding some success, it sounds like. And like, how do you feel like, what, is there a process or a way that you're going about in finding it?
Trial and error, humility. You gotta be like willing to, it's difficult to do on the drums because you're moving all your limbs at the same time. So it's almost like a mental thing that you then have to apply to your body. So that's specifically when we were talking about drums here. So specifically on drums, you got to first think, I guess, how can I adjust what I'm doing if it's worth it for you to stay in that situation? Is it is this even a pursuit worth pursuing? Do I want to even change my natural inner rhythmic reaction to accommodate this musical situation? The answer for that was always yes for me for a long time, and it's becoming less that way as I get older and my time becomes more valuable, or I have other things that I really need to be doing as well. But yeah, being able to listen to how you're sitting, regardless of it's definitely beneficial to your playing and your life to be able to evaluate how you're sitting in a position, whether it's musical or professional or emotional, relationship wise. But like, yeah, hear the music, listen to the feedback. Hopefully it's not too rude from the other people in the band.
How are you with feedback generally?
It depends on how it's delivered. I get pretty icy and it's getting worse as I get older. I will admit, like I feel myself being like one of those older dudes that I noticed when I was younger. Like, oh, he's been through it a little bit. He's getting tired. It's like, now I have like less patience but again, if it's delivered with sincerity, openness, and you know, without any degree of entitlement, then I love it. But like, I'm also a pretty sensitive person, so if I detect any of that, I don't think that I'm very I kind of like get icy a little bit. I get like shut down, and I'll get through the situation. I won't cause a scene or anything, but I generally will move on.
The mood changes. My
mood changes, and that sucks, because then that's just like, then that impacts the music, and then what's like, what are we doing at that point? Right. And again, I've that is another thing that like requires self-evaluation, and if I'm gonna be putting myself in those situations, I have to get through it. Just be an adult about it. You know, like, don't close off. Just try to accommodate the feedback to whatever extent you can. Appreciate the way it was spoken to you or the way it was delivered to you. And then when the job is done, especially if this is happening on a gig, get the job done. And then on the drive home, think about what you want to do next.
Yeah.
But being professional at all times is really important, and making sure that the people that are in the room that came there to see music that night aren't suffering because of some kind of interpersonal thing that you're experiencing. That's important. And
Comes through.
yeah, absolutely. And I've been guilty of not doing that, and I've also been successful at reining that in, I think.
One of the things that I think about too, and with drums, because you've got that full range and it's percussive. So there's a direct relationship to cause and effect, right? So like you get that immediate feedback. And one of the things I've been exploring in my concept of drummers, and also like of myself, like having some learning differences growing up that I didn't like, that were recognized, but not really addressed. Namely like, and you know, we can talk all day long about, you know, these types of neuro divergence. And I know it's like controversial for a lot of people, but like ADHD for one, dyslexia for another. And one of the things that I've learned is that with ADHD, I don't think about it as a deficit. I think about it as an evolutionary kind of process that's happened, and a hunter-gatherer mentality. That's why I kind of keyed in when you said it's a hunt, like we're hunting or searching for that rhythm, right? But I'm this is a circuitous statement just to kind of bring it back around to like how that fits in with what we do and that feedback. A lot of times, so if ADHD is not a deficit, maybe more of a teaching deficit than it is a learning deficit, right, or deficiency. These are folks with ADHD. People tend to be really good in their physical environment. A lot of times in the outside world, right? Like a hunter-gatherer, like you're constantly paying attention. Not only are you like looking for sign for wild game or foraging for whatever's editable, or, you know, finding resources, but you're keyed into all of it at once, right? And so you're really like giving into your senses, trying to be present to make sure that, you know, and listen to your body's cues to know where that next source of food is coming from.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're also working with your group of people on this hunt. You're making tools, weapons, you know, baskets, whatever, nets, everything, in order to like get all these things. And then there's also this hyper focus of being really quiet and really paying attention. And then also an active moment, right? So like these are all things that are a natural part of a successful human, you know? And so that's the part that I'm interested in, not so much like the struggles in learning or in, you know, our modern learning environments and things like that. But one of the things that our mindset, I think, is set up for is that feedback. Like we crave that feedback. It's a lot harder to get feedback when you're writing an essay, sending it in. Like you eventually get that feedback versus when you're hitting a snare drum, it's immediate. You know if it's in tune, you know, depending on your ear, or if it's the tone you want, and if it's if the placement's right. Like it doesn't sound right. Like you're paying attention to your body's cues, right? Yeah. So it's just kind of like this feedback. And one of the things, I think this is also true of artists in general, is that, so that's feedback in a more immediate sense of how things sound, but also like in the sense of like your bandmates and how they provide feedback too, right? Like it can put you on the defensive, or it can, you know, it can be, you know, offered up as a supportive, you know, piece of information for you to consider, right? But we all struggle with criticism, you know?
Yeah, and for me, it's more difficult on drums because of the overall effort. It's drums are hard to play. It's hard to learn to play them. It's hard to sustain a constant regular beat that's also musical, like aware of what's happening musically. I mean, you could keep a beat and keep it steady, but that might not be a musical beat. To figure out how to like keep that steady thing happening in order to like accommodate and elevate the music that's happening around me. It's difficult, and I feel like it's a very a giving process, you know. And so when it falls short, and I know that I'm not alone, because I've heard about a couple other, and I know other drummers have told me this, and I've gotten feedback from like the leaders of their band saying, oh, like, well, when he does it, like usually he's like 99%, like everything he does is perfect, but there's that 1% that sometimes it's not right. If we bring that up, he just gets like super quiet. He just doesn't, you know, because it's almost like if you're reacting to the music on drums, it's like I'm doing everything I possibly can right now. Like this was my best survival reaction. It was almost like, if you can get kind of intense with it, like if that didn't work, then I'm dead. Like this was my best attempt at surviving this situation. Yeah. And I failed. So now I don't know what to do. Like now I'm going to be taking direction from somebody who's not a drummer. Yeah. And trying to fit their idea of what they want on drums into something that doesn't come naturally to me, or doesn't like, that I don't know to be reliable as something that I can use to survive musically in this situation. That might say a lot about my head, but I mean, like, I think there's like there's like kind of I think we all operate under the surface of like, there's a lot of like undercurrents of, you know, survival basically. And that, because we live in a modern world, those impulses and emotions, they come out, you know, there's versions of that in social situations and in professional situations. And then, you know, if you're a professional musician or drummer, it comes out like that. But yeah, I don't know. I've been learning a lot. You never stop learning about this sort of thing though, and putting yourself in different musical positions and being brave about it is just going to make you, I say this as I'm actively also trying to back off, but that has more to do with like time management in my own life. But like getting into different musical situations, different types of music, playing with different types of musicians, which you have the opportunity to do as a drummer, because I found that I've had a lot of opportunity to do that. I get to play with my favorite jazz musicians, my favorite folk musicians. I don't play regularly, but I've gotten to play a bunch with my favorite bluegrass musicians, my favorite quote unquote indie rock musicians. I get to play with them as well. And they all have different priorities musically. If they didn't, they'd all be playing the same kind of music. But they all need something out of drums. And so there's one project that I've been right now. We haven't even played live, but we've been recording in the studio a lot. And I've been, you know, really opening myself up to ideas. You know, essentially I'm allowing myself to be produced and say, try this drum part, try that, try it a little bit differently. And the more I do it, the easier it becomes, the more comfortable I am with that kind of feedback. At first it was not so easy, and I was feeling demoralized and like why this is a waste of time. Like I'm doing what I think sounds good. Why isn't that good enough? And the answer is because there is a lot of different drum parts that could have worked in that situation. I was thinking of one, maybe two of them that were easy and comfortable for me to play. But then when some other ones were presented to me, it did start to make sense. And stuff that would have never occurred to me. Like, dude brought a tune to the table, and my immediate reaction, it sounded like the Southwest, like storytelling, not ballad, but like a slow burn, you know? And I'm like getting all these like woody sounds. I got the snare drum turned off. I'm using mallets and that kind of thing. And it's starting to sounding really good. We got upright bass, violin. It's sounding like a campfire story, you know, like the way I was reacting to it when I first heard it. And then one of the other guys was like, and also I like to like do this move where I kind of do like one drops, like that reggae groove, but with like country stuff. Okay. You can blend those in and make that work kind of. I like doing it, and there's a way to do it that I think sounds cool. And I was kind of doing that. And the one dude was like, what if it's more like a rebel rouser kind of beat? Like, and what he meant by that, which I didn't know, but like that, like the Exodus beat, kind of like dun 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 dun, where you're kind of like on the floor or on the kick drum. I mean,
Okay.
She's like, what if we put that, which is like it's almost like a double time beat to what we were doing. And at first I was like, I would never do that because I wouldn't want to step on the vocals and like kill any of the space that the vocalist was using to deliver their story. But once that idea was out on the surface, we started playing it, and the vocalist was down with that idea and just worked around it, like could sing over top of it, could make what they needed to do work with that. And now we've got this really killer original sounding piece of music that wouldn't have come around without a little bit of critiquing, what the most natural thing for me to do was. So there was a lesson in feedback. It was a lesson in the value of being able to, just appreciate somebody who's not a drummer and their ideas about the way the drums might work. And we were in a studio situation, and that I think is more ideal than on the bandstand immediately when we're about to perform. I think it works a lot better when you have time to ruminate on it a little bit, as opposed to it being kind of thrown at you on the bandstand and then having to try to figure it out, and hopefully it works.
Nice.
But anyway, little tangent about
That's
my
perfect.
recent adventures in humility and feedback.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. I think it's, there's this book that I read recently. It's older now. I think it's like 20 years old, but it's called The War of Art. Have you heard of that book before? It's the same author who wrote, like, he's a fiction writer and wrote like Bagger Vance and things like that. But he pretty much just boils everything down to like the struggle, like the work of the artist is to fight against resistance, like for anything that comes up. And then in the book, he also talks about, critics and how as an artist or professional, critics are what does he say? The critics are like the unwitting personification of resistance, because if it's something that they liked, it doesn't matter to us because we know what it sounded like and we still want it to be better. And if it's something they didn't like, we also suffer from that. Our inner critic already let us know it doesn't sound good and we want that to be better too. Mm-hmm. So it just feels like it's just a constant, thing that just kind of presents its own struggle. I don't know how much I agree or disagree with that, because ultimately, like, we put all this stuff out for mass consumption. We publish, like, we do these things to try to get something back from people, to get that feedback. And that's kind of what we're setting ourselves up for. So I don't know if I necessarily agree with this concept, like that's resistance personified, versus like it can be a frustration point for sure. And so trying to, like what you're talking about, is accept it, find out what's true about the criticism, and if it can be helped, changed, like you're talking about, like trying to adjust the playing to some point, and having that clear example of like when it worked, and it kind of like broadened the whole idea. I don't know that it really, because again, drums, it's a community thing. Right?
Yeah.
Like it, and so everyone's going to have an opinion about it because it's in your face.
Yeah.
And it's affecting how everyone's either playing or listening, dancing, moving, shouting, whatever it is, like it has an effect. So everyone's going to have an opinion, right?
Oh yeah, totally. They're hard, the bottom line is like, if you want a challenge, like try to play the drums don't just try to play the drums, try to play music with the drums. Like see if you can make something that like you're hitting using wood, or maybe sometimes nylon, to strike a metal or whatever heads are made of now surface, and like try to fit that into like stuff that's making like musical notes,
right?
And like make that fit. It's certainly tough.
Yeah.
But I guess that's another, I don't even know where I would go with this, but it's probably true on a lot of levels, but not necessarily a given that people are doing this to get something. We are publishing this stuff, but I don't think it's necessarily a given that what we're doing it for is for feedback. Like, I think a lot of people are doing it because it is right. You could call it a lot of different things. You can call, like, I keep using this word compulsion or whatever, but it's not necessarily a compulsion either. It's just a drive to, like, it's just a natural impulse that you want to, like, do this thing. And yeah, maybe the only reason to publish stuff is to get feedback. I don't really know. Like, but I don't necessarily know that's a given all the time.
Yeah.
Like, maybe it's just like people don't know what else to do. Musicians or artists don't know what else to do with their lives other than to, like, and look, can either be a recluse about it or they can just go forward. I don't know. I just, when you mentioned that, it just made me think, like, the impetus for playing music. I think the reason why I'm jumping on it is because I think it's an often held misconception by people who listen to music, especially now in our culture. Like, the point of playing music is to get attention, is you want attention, and that you want to be revered, because it's, to them, I may say to them, like, to people who don't necessarily play music or haven't made it a lifestyle, like, what it's difficult maybe to like, relate to the feeling of just needing to, like, play music or express yourself musically. So, like, if that's not a basic understanding, then what's left? What's the payment? Oh, well, musicians are cool and they get the girls, or, you know, like, all the stereotypes.
Yeah.
And,
like, the ego is wrapped up in a lot of that.
Yeah, which is absolutely true.
Right.
Like, there's definitely an element of that, but it's not. I think it's maybe a common misconception that, you know, one of the main reasons to do it is for the attention and for the feedback.
Right.
And I'm not going to say that isn't baked into humanity. Like, we all do these things. Like, even as a kid, if you're not playing music, you're being bad or you're being good to get attention from your parents.
Right.
But I don't necessarily think that it's a given or even that takes up, like, it shouldn't take up an exponentially large portion of your motivation as an artist. Even though it is there, and, you know, you're not wrong in saying that. I just felt like, sometimes I feel like it's been assumed when I've been spoken to by somebody who doesn't make art or play music for a living that, like, I'm doing it because I want people to, like, think I'm cool, or like, I'm doing it for the attention. And
they think about all that, like, there's that, you know, they have those examples out there in the world, right? The rock star or whatever.
Exactly.
And they feel like that's everyone's goal. Like, oh, like, I want to be a rock star. Like, that's your goal if you're an artist or musician, is like, that's, you know, so people have their different ideas about success. Yeah. Point taken. I think that's an important piece of it. I think where I kind of come from with it in part was not necessarily that we're looking for affirmation. There's always that. But there's a lot of thoughts I have right now. Like, one of the things, and I've talked about this a couple of times now, but through that book, one of the things that I pulled from it was thinking about things conceptually as, like, serving the muse, right? Or the muses, right? Or, like, these angels or whatever. And we've been kind of talking, like, conceptually, like you had mentioned it, like, there's an energy, like, if we're open to it, it can kind of come through the room. Like, that energy can kind of come through the room. And that's, and so maybe if you, like, one of the things about the muses in Greek mythology was that, and there's different muses for any different, you know, effort, if it's agriculture or music or whatever it is. But they talked about, it's very poetic, where they talk about the muses essentially can communicate truth or lies about the past, present, and future. And so as so very much like that conduit, like the musician is often like, I think in that sense is the messenger, or can be used as that conduit or the messenger, but it's never really about themselves in particular. But it's, so all things that allow you to be that conduit for that message are things that, you know, if you're working on technique, openness, being present, listening, and getting your ego out of the way, then that I feel like is where some of the most, it's always hard to not like qualify something, but to, in my opinion, is like where some of the most beautiful or life-changing or sad art comes from, something that makes you feel something, like it's communicating something. And so that's kind of where, like, if you're communicating, that's kind of where I was thinking.
Got you. Yeah.
As far as like, because there is some feedback, because I guess, like, to your point, like your point is very valid too, because it all comes down to like how you define success in your endeavor. So can I just ask you that, just point blank, like what is the mark of success for you in your music?
Well, it comes in a couple different ways. I mean, I play a lot of live drums, and so when I'm in a room or I'm playing a show or at a gig, and I feel successful at the end of the night when everybody in the room, so there is like, the attention that I'm getting back, like but it's not that they're directing it towards me. It's more like I did something. These people are happy now. Like, they came to see music, and I was a part of this music that was successful in making them happy. And that makes me feel successful, is that my function in this world has been done for the night. But it's not only that. Like, there's been plenty of situations, a lot of them actually, where that is in play. People seem very happy and pleased. Everybody, whatever, the owner of the club's like, awesome, did great. Here's your money. Successful. Came there to get paid and play music successfully. But something happened where I messed up, or like I didn't play something the way I wanted it to, or I maybe didn't set up the groove in a way that sustained itself. I knew that if something happened that I knew could have been better, or if there was some dissatisfaction amongst my bandmates, my peers in the band, people I work with and whose opinion I value, if they were dissatisfied with something that I could have done better, then that level of success goes down. All those things sort of have to be in play for me to feel like that particular night of work went well. And in most cases, I don't hear a recording of that. I don't have any reference to know if, like, what I felt was actually what was out there in the world. I mean, somebody may have had a voice memo of it. Somebody may have put something on YouTube, whatever.
Sure.
But I do know from recording that a lot of times what feels like the take isn't actually the one that comes off the best on a recording. What's that worth in a live performance? That's up for debate. Probably not much, since the experience was a live experience, and the way we played was for that live experience. And, I actually have a good example of this with the Chord. Just recorded 2 nights, actually at Little Jumbo. And we had a discussion this, when we got to hear everything back. And the first night we all went away thinking, well, that was pretty bad. Like, it felt weird. We were all sort of up in our heads, like hyper aware of the fact that we were being recorded, but trying to blend that with our normal experience of feeling loose and just going for stuff. And then the second night, we were all giving each other high fives at the end of the night, thinking we crushed it,
Right.
And the reality is it was a mixed bag. Like, when we heard it back, at least to my ears, there was stuff that sounded a lot better the first night. But I could specifically remember one song in particular when we ended it, feeling like all sweaty, and my head was all like pounding, like thinking I just wrecked that. That was not good. And hearing it back, I'm like, that actually works. That I don't hear the mistakes or the things that I was feeling. So anyway, there's that feeling of success. So, but the other, if you're recording, another great feeling of success is when and this may be even to a higher degree, when I know that, like, I have played drums in a way on a track that is inspiring to me, and that sounds like me. Sounds like the things that I find inspiring about drums and in groove. And I get pretty high on that feeling, and I get equally as down on a situation where I did not represent what is important to me about music and drums. In fact, I represented the opposite, things I don't like. And it's tough because, if you're in a situation where, you are the drummer, and maybe you're in the band, or maybe you're just working for somebody else, and they're really feeling that thing that you are like, God, I hate that. And that's not me, but it is now. If somebody hears it, that's your stamp, and that's what happened. And maybe it's not as bad as you think, but for me, I get kind of intense about it, and feel very unsuccessful in those situations where I let the groove stray, or I whiffed on a fill, or I just did something that sucked to my ears. So those are I guess those are my definitions of success. Now that I'm getting older and I'm a dad, and I've got these they're not peripheral they're very forefront, responsibilities in my life. My ideas of success there are new things that are involved, and they've always kind of been there, but they're becoming amplified. And that has to do with time management. How efficiently did I get that work done? Because now that ultimately means time away from my family and my home, which is where I really like to be the most.
Right.
And also success means, did what I do with my day, is that something that's going to be like a building block for the future, or was it just sort of like a one-off that just meant, a little bit of money for the day? Because at this stage in the game, everything is kind of got to be a building block, and so there's that element too. Like, what I do with my day has to, I have to feel as though it's going to mean something for the future, or at least have value in the future. Like, it's a worthwhile investment of my time, essentially. Yeah. And then, the money aspect is also there too. And it's just an unavoidable, for me anyways. I have to provide a certain amount of money every day. So there's those other things, and they all have to fit into my old definitions of success too. I'm not going to just give up. I'm not going to just start playing gigs because they pay a lot, but I hate them. I can't physically do that to myself. So I've got
physically.
I can't physically.
Do you have like a physical response to that? Like, if you just started taking, just taking the gig for the cash?
Yeah. And I think that's probably because drums are such a physical instrument. I probably would do a lot better on guitar. I say that, but maybe not. I don't know. I decided years ago, like 20 years ago, that I didn't want to take stuff on guitar that was going to interfere with my my relationship with my muse. I didn't want to just be throwing notes out into the air, because there's a guitar solo happening, and now I'm just gonna like blaze a bunch of like licks, which were gonna be successful in the moment, and be like, that's what guitars do. They play licks,
shred, right?
And they shred for the chorus or whatever. And then, but like, I had done a fair amount of that, and I really was realizing it was hurting me. So yeah, there is like and maybe I'm just like a really sensitive person and things manifest physically or whatever, but I have anxiety builds up, and that's a physical response or whatever.
Totally.
I have a physical response to that. But it's all work balance, man. It's either I do that, or I like go cut a bunch of grass, or do weed eating work, or move a refrigerator, or like dig a ditch, like other manual labor that I've done plenty of on the side. But we were talking about musical success. And
Yeah, but we were also, I was curious too, just about that physical sensation that you get,
yeah,
Yeah.
there's nothing better when you feel like you're self-actualized through music, and the music that you're just a part of, and the music that you've heard back on the tape or whatever that you just recorded to, is like, all right, we'll put that on Tombstone. That's good.
Yeah.
Good to go.
Nice. That's awesome. And is there, we've covered so much good stuff today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, sure. For me, I don't think I've realized how much I need to talk about it. You said before we started, you were like, well, what this is not is therapy. And I'm like, it might turn into therapy.
That's okay too. I mean,
mouth.
if it's therapeutic for you, I like when I say that, it's, sometimes in therapy, like what comes up is like unrecognized or undealt with trauma that sometimes can be very significant and leave. I don't want people leaving here feeling raw, like emotionally raw and not ready or able or wanting to like take on like the rest of their day. I don't want it to be a tax essentially, because like therapy can be taxing sometimes. And so, but that's all I mean. But otherwise, when I say this is not therapy, it's also saying like, maybe not your therapy, but this is helpful for me.
Yeah.
I feel like every interaction can be therapeutic, if you're both like speaking honestly and open. So, and that's what I appreciate coming from you. Like, I feel like you've always spoken in that, like within those terms.
Cool,
I think
man.
it comes through your music too.
Cool. Well, that's, I feel successful.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah. And then, no, it is, I came away feeling very, enriched and like energized, the times that we've met in the past,
Nice.
not only talking, I don't teach much. And it felt really good to like present some ideas that I thought might, that you could benefit from. But then also just getting into like the woo-woo stuff about, philosophy. I came away feeling so energized and realizing that, I've been putting all these ideas and energy like it's just into the drums or maybe even weed eating. I don't know, but like not verbalizing them. And so being able to express them verbally, has been therapeutic and it's been very good.
Good.
So
Awesome.
This has been nice too.
Oh, I love that. Well, that makes me feel like I'm on the right path.
Cool. Yeah. And
With,
hopefully
like,
it's
following-
beneficial to whoever's listening as well.
I hope so too. And I think, I think there's an audience. I think they'll find it and I'll find the audience. And, I also feel like it's just what I'm driven to do. I'm following that interest because I think it's interesting. And I think, it can be helpful. That's my hope. That's the measure of success.
Yeah. Cool.
Or one of them.
Drums is a perfect platform for it because it is such a, it's so physical. So there's like, for people and, I've got my own trauma that I've gone through some stuff that I think and I've never really had therapy, but I do think that drums have been therapeutic for me. And I think it's one of the reasons why I get so sensitive when I'm critiqued is because it's, I've been lucky enough that my self medication on the drums has also been able to be successful. I've been able to merge that into other people's musical ambitions. Not just my own musical ambition. I have musical ambitions on the drums, but I've been able to like take that relationship I have with the drums and like bring it into somebody else's musical situation to make it work, aka be a drummer in a band and play gigs and play successful shows. But I do think that me being a drummer and like 20 years has flown by, and it's just, and I've been doing that largely for the last 20 years. I do think that I was just drawn to it out of a therapeutic need, not really realizing it, both like physically, mentally. My dad was diagnosed with ADHD. I've got like other diagnosed individuals in my family. So there's some like levels in my head that probably could be diagnosed, which never really have been. But I've just sort of really taken out a lot of that on the drums. It served as they have served as an intellectual pursuit, a physical and I think physically therapeutic outlet, a social outlet. I got married in 2018, and there was like 200 plus people at the wedding between Amanda and I. I mean, I've gotten to know so many people, and so I've gotten to do so many cool things because I've prioritized playing music in my life, and I've gone down that road.
Yeah.
And so socially, it's been huge. Yeah, there's an element of it. You mentioned one of the other drummers you were talking to is kind of like feeling like he wanted to step away from taking so many drumming gigs and focus on his own outlet of production. And I'm in a similar boat after all these years of being in a position of accommodating what others want and need, which has been like fulfilling for me on a just a really basic level. It's the kind of person I am. I'm realizing that throughout the years, I've just been not ignoring, but not working on what I need to work on in order to express my own particular musical ideas. And so that's, and I have I have like tons of unfinished songs on guitar, lots of like organ stuff I like to do. And for me, I think it's like, I hate to just like be a cop out. Like I got ADHD. It's like, it's hard for me to finish something and like finish my own ideas and like finish my own work. It's just always been so much easier to wait for somebody to call me and just be like, yeah, I could do that job. And then I get that feeling of artistic participation, social participation, satisfaction, feeling of success. But it's been welling up now for a long time, and I really need to figure out how to get that done. And I've been making strides that I'm like carving out the space at my home for it. And I think that's an important part.
Have you been like incorporating anyone else in that process?
Yeah, definitely. But I'm not ready to yet. 'Cause it's like, I don't have those like I don't have like a first release that I just want, I play a bunch of different instruments, and I would love to just have like at least one representation of like that scenario just out there. So that's my goal, is to have that done first. And then, I have other, for example, I mean, I like to lead bands on guitar. That's really fun. But lately I've been obsessed with playing organ, particularly sort of the Lounge Lizard cheesy organs with these drum machine beats. And I like to use external drum machines, but playing bass with my foot on those pedals.
Okay.
And so seeing how much listenable music I can make with one of those forgotten pieces of technology, one of those instruments from the 70s that just got passed over, and nobody has really made popular for the most part. There's been some examples, but hasn't really made, and not to say that my music will be popular, but music that is could be popular, you could actually listen to and like put on and make it stand on its own with like guitars or other instruments that people make music that people listen to on.
Sure.
So that's like kind of been a fun goal of mine, is to make music with those things. But yeah, so
this is so much like I feel like this is helpful for me, because this is a lot of what I've also experienced in my own life, in different ways. It was manifest a little bit different. Like, we have commonalities in music. Mine's been more on the back burner for a long period of time, but like, and that's what has interested me in working in the psychiatric or psychological or mental health world, is seeing where, especially when it comes to that ADHD kind of designation, and how people successfully navigate that, like, and not necessarily like diagnosing it or pathologizing it, but you see it a lot, like folks with that mentality, or that kind of the way that their brain works, they're successful in, like I was talking about before, physical kinds of work. So I was a paramedic for a while, I was a river guide for a while. These are things that are like very much like well suited. You know, there's several different things going on at once. You have to be good at, you know, several different things in order to make it a successful trip or to make it a successful 911 call or whatever the situation is. Like you bring some organization to the chaos, and you're comfortable in chaos and also creating some path out of that chaos, you know. Surgeons, lawyers, you know, like a lot of it just, you know, it's professional and technical and all these different things, you know. And so it's just that a lot of the deficits are highlighted in our society. Like one of the things about that whole diagnostic and statistical manual is that like every single symptom in there is a human condition, is a normal human condition, like almost every single one of them, right? And usually it's a set of those all together. And the key piece is that it creates a problem in your life, right? That's when it becomes diagnosable. Well, so many of our mental health issues are related to the fact that our society and technology evolve faster than our biology. So like much like you were saying before, like when you, like everything that happens, it's like it's a matter of survival, even if it's not like so physically like obvious. Like there's no saber-toothed tiger there, but we're as worked up as if there were. Like our heart and lungs start working faster. All our blood is shunted away from our gut out to our peripheral muscles so that we can fight or run. And so now, you know, we're in a boardroom meeting or whatever it is, and we're sweating and we're nervous and we have problems with public speaking when we shouldn't. Right. And then it's the shame cycle that kind of comes in on top of that, that creates this anxiety disorder. Yeah. And the problem is we're not completing that cycle of anxiety, right? Like if it were a tiger or whatever that was chasing us down, we would run or fight it. And that would complete the cycle of anxiety. Yeah. We would have some place to direct that energy. Yeah. And so that's why I love hearing your story, because like, well, you say maybe you have it, but then you've like led this life of community. Like, so some other pieces, like we always talk about the medicine and psychiatry, right? Because studies show that it can be very helpful for people. And there's a lot of issues with that medicine too, right? A lot of problems with it. But at the same time, there's what's not talked about enough is the other aspects, the other pillars of addressing your ADHD comes down to educating yourself about it, knowing how you learn and knowing the environments that work best for you. Connection with others, because a lot of times if like you can't pay attention to a conversation that someone you care about is having or what they're talking about because you have 1,000 things on your mind, it can cause a rift in the relationship. So like educating yourself and those around you, trying to maintain like good coping strategies for it. Sometimes it can be humor, like, you know, my ADHD brain, like, I'm sorry, I really care about what you're talking about, but I was thinking about, you know, the sound that was coming from that ticking pipe over there, like wondering like what's going on over there, you know? So can you repeat the last 5 seconds of what you said? And then, exercise, like bodily movement. 'Cause again, it comes back to that whole like life outside, you know, and engaging with your physical world. That's hugely important. And so it gets to be, and so one of the things I've often talked about and, you know, with folks that have ADHD is like, the question might be, do I have to take medicine for this? No, of course not. You don't have to take medicine for this at all. You know, it's totally up to you. People are successful at this when they still educate themselves enough and can create their environment, like become, so to speak, like a master, so to speak, of your environment, and understanding yourself well enough and finding those things that you enjoy doing and can focus on, and then getting the support for the other stuff. And so last point, but like the drummer is the supporting role. You've been supporting so many people for so long that it's really hard to then ask for support from others too, you know? And, you know, folks with this mindset, with the ADHD mindset or drums or entrepreneurial mindset or all these kinds of things, have like big, great ideas, can really help motivate yourself and others. But it's the detail-oriented work that often gets lost. And to come to realize, oh, there's actually people that love to do those detail-oriented stuff. So if it's finding like a partner, an assistant, a friend, bandmate, whatever, that can kind of help with those things, then you start to really create that kind of team that comes together, you know?
That's true.
And so, but yeah.
Well, I do have people in mind and interested to help me do those things. And I feel very fortunate to be in that position. It's just one of the things that has come with being in the musical situations that I've been in, and just kind of, I mean, truthfully, just like following my heart, like making sure that I'm playing music and going with people that like I resonate with. And now there are a number of people that, I mean, I really could think if say I wanted to have a band, I could think there, I have multiple people that in mind on multiple instruments that I could think that person, I would love to play with them. And they could help me make the sound that I hear in my head.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is, well, just being in Asheville, you know, like Asheville's a really good town. And there's a lot of talented people, and a lot of talented people who are not, cold, you know. There's a lot of warm, talented people here.
That's
And
what I've been finding just with this endeavor, like talking to different drummers, like just being totally open and willing.
yeah, it's just like the culture that has come up in Asheville over the past 20 years. And, still so stoked that I made the choice to move here.
Nice.
But yeah, I've got friends for sure.
Nice.
It's just a matter of me want to be like, this is what I'm just so stoked. A buddy of mine just lent me his like 6-track pro level cassette.
Okay.
So I'm like recording this stuff
Nice.
right to tape, and I couldn't be more pleased with the way it sounds.
Nice.
He's got a little cassette label, and so hopefully when I can get this stuff done, it'll be released on that.
Cool.
Yeah, man. Yeah, so I do think with like drummers, it's important if you are like to have your own thing. I think, you know, it's because we do find ourselves playing other people's music a lot of the time. And maybe that's the thing with these jazz drummers nowadays, are like, they know it going into it. Blakey knew it. He sure, and Chico Hamilton knew it. I don't know if you check Chico Hamilton out.
I don't. Yeah.
So
I
a
don't
jazz
know.
drummer from, he probably was playing in the 40s, but like 50s, 60s, probably into the 70s too. Anyway, but like killer bands. Chico Hamilton Quartet, really interesting stuff. Jim Hall on guitar. So I think it's important to make sure that your own musical ideas are not getting pushed away, or, you know, because then the more you do, and I'm speaking from experience, the more I just ignore them, like, the more tender they become, and the more insecure they become, and the more difficult it is to resurrect them and integrate them into your life, I think, and to know that they have value. You got like all the youthful, just unquestioning pride that you have in your own ideas. If you don't give those things space, or you don't attend to them over time, I think they require more energy at the back end. Like if you're older, like myself, I find myself having they just need to be nurtured. There's just so much more happening in my life now. So I gotta like remind myself that's important.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it just made me think of like sometimes how the boundaries can be so helpful for the music too, right? Like if it's the boundaries of like, you know, your time has become more important as a father, right? Our time, like, you know, I've got my own kids, and it also provides you, you know, like you're on the hook for something, which is always a good thing, right? Like if you just have this ample amount of time, like it's hard to really, you know, get anything done, you know, but then it really helps you prioritize what's important. So like, you know, if it is like your music, you know, cause you've got your little one to care about and to be with and to enjoy and to be there for, and also like sharing your ideas and getting those things out now, like, you know, that's that's the benefit. Like you realize, like if you hold on to it much longer, like it's going to be harder. But it can also be a beautiful thing to be like, yeah, this is what Daddy's interested in, like, and share that with her to be like,
Oh,
like
totally.
this is like, it's always important to like, you know, get it out, like to prioritize that too. But it's still difficult. It puts everything on a different timeline, and it's always hard to navigate.
Yeah. Well, the gravity of it now is like, is much greater. Like, cause as a young person, I think many of the things that were holding me back from releasing stuff and be like, is that cool enough? Is that going to be like, is that all right? Will that be received well? Or do I like that? Do I think that's good? But now it's like, this is going to shape her life, you know, like this is like something real in the world. This is just like in my imagination. And then I'm going to put it on, like YouTube or something, and then it's just like in this huge sea just like floating around me. Like, no, this is, like you said, this is what Daddy's into, and this is like a thing that, you know, when she's 25, she'll be concerned, be like, yeah, he liked playing all these like crappy sounding organs that he found on Facebook. Whatever, that was him though, you know. But it has this new element of importance to it, that it's not like, it needs to be out there, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I look
for
forward,
her
like
sake,
if you do release it or share it, I want to hear it.
oh, you'll hear it. Yeah. It's in the works. It's fun.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah. I'm obsessed with those old things, man. A lot of meat left on those bones.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks again, Evan.
Yeah. Thanks, Joel.